Hey everybody, Paul Mack here. I've got another question from a viewer. This one comes from Seth Mullins, 8346. Is there any reason why the main post of a pole building couldn't be put on piers like the post for the sheds are? I believe he's referring to the side sheds on my pole barn on the series I did on the pole barn. I'm sawing up wood to build a pole barn blacksmith shop, and I don't have access to enough cedar trees for this. I've cut 4x4s from dead pine, and I'm going to have to either burn them to make them rot resistant or put them on those little piers. I think perhaps the concrete piers would be better for me because the spot I have is very low and gets low standing water when it rains. What would you do, Paul Mack? Well, Seth, there is no reason why you can't build a pole barn up on the piers, the whole thing on piers, rather than just the side sheds alone. The only thing it might keep you from doing is actually calling it a pole barn. Because as you all probably know, a pole barn is called a pole barn because of its foundation is poles. The poles themselves go into the ground, and that provides your foundation rather than having it on concrete or a slab or piers all over the place. That's why they call it a pole barn. It's really pretty simple. The convenience of a pole barn is that when you plant those poles and get them roughly rectangular, perfectly square, everything good 90-degree angles, the beauty of it is that when those poles are there, they're planted in the ground. They need no bracing. You just begin from that point to stretch your sills across, nail those in, and then continue with the upper part, the roof of the barn. That's what's so convenient about the poles. They don't need bracing to get them up there. So, Seth, the trick with building on those concrete piers is just that. You're going to have to brace the poles that you use because they're going to be sitting on the piers. You're going to have to brace all those poles from at least, with at least 2 long boards going down to the ground, brace them all, get them in place until you can connect the upper portions of them with your sills or beams or whatever you're going to build with and continue that building. Once all the upper woodwork is in place, that tends to hold it, and then later you can go in with diagonal braces and firm it up even more. So the trick is going to be bracing all those 4x4s or whatever you end up using up until you get everything else connected together. And then it's pretty simple from that point forward. It's almost like the pole barn build. Now, as I did on the video of the pole barn build for the side sheds, I would certainly, Seth, when you're making those concrete piers, drop in a rebar, a bolt, or something sticking up. Small piece of rebar, it doesn't have to be, but maybe 3-4 inches, so that you can, when you set those beams or poles on that pier, you can drill a hole in the beam and set it so that it goes up in that hole so it won't knock off the piers later, kids fooling around or your tractor slips out of gear and bumps a pole or whatever. So I would certainly put those bolts or the rebar, set those in your concrete for more stability. One more thing I'll mention, and I've seen this a lot in barns around my area of southwest Arkansas. I even remember it on my Paul Mack's barn. When I was a little playing around, I would look at the bottom near the ground, and there was a big beam. I don't remember, it's 6x4, 8x6, something like that. They were kind of all different dimensions because a lot of times, back then the sawmill would just give him whatever, and he used whatever. And I remember those piers, he had piers under that beam because I remember after the barn was long gone, Daddy would move those piers out of the way. They were kind of in the way, sitting there in the pasture, those concrete piers. But anyway, the way he did it, and the way I've seen other barns, my wife's grandpa's barn was this way too, built this way. You had concrete piers ever so far apart, and on the piers would be a long beam sitting on the piers. And if the side of the barn is too long for one beam, they might overlap those beams with a lap joint and continue the beam on down the run of the building. But anyway, I've seen those beams across piers on the bottom, and from that point they would it's almost like traditional framing, where they would build the wall and then lift the wall and then brace that wall and then put another wall up and then begin connecting the upper portions. That's how I've seen that done. Of course, that wouldn't be called a pole barn either, just a barn with piers and a beam. Secondly, Seth, or thirdly, I don't remember where we're at. You mentioned you're building in a low spot where rain gathers or water stands. And I don't know exactly where you live. This depends on how far north you live or how far south you live. But you're going to want to check your typical frost line for your area. In other words, how deep does when there's a big freeze, how deep does the ground freeze? I don't remember exactly what it is for this area. It's not really deep, maybe 6-8 inches. I might be wrong of that. But the further north you go, that frost line is going to be a lot deeper. When you dig the hole for those piers and you fill it with concrete, you're going to want to dig well below that frost line, because if you don't, with freezes and thaws, that's going to make the ground move, and it's going to make your barn really, really settle pretty bad. And it may do some damage to it. So just make sure you dig that pier hole well beneath the frost line so that it's good stability no matter how cold it gets wherever you are. Now, maybe you have a question about pole barns, how to build them or whatever. Just leave your question in the comment section below, or if you'd like to add anything to what we've talked about today, then leave that in the comment section. Or maybe you're thinking about building your own pole barn. I've got something you might be interested in. It's my book that I wrote just a few years ago called Building an Old-Fashioned Pole Barn. Now, I wrote this book not for the carpenter who's been building things for years. There's no blueprints really in it. It's very, very basic. I was not a carpenter, and so I wrote this book with the farmer in mind who doesn't build that often. I tried to do it in such a way that it's easy to understand, just step by step, basics for building a common pole barn. But not only that, I built it in such a way that you can adapt it to your needs, and your pole barn doesn't have to necessarily look like mine. It doesn't have to have the same layout. You can make yours, more room in it, or slightly bigger, or slightly smaller, or add more side sheds, or no side sheds, just whatever you want to do. This book will help you to build a pole barn, or at least get you thinking about what kind of pole barn you might like that would benefit you on your farm. Whether you need something for your cows, something to milk your cows in, whether you need a blacksmith shop like Seth here, or maybe you want to live in it, if the wife will let you. But anyway, Building an Old-Fashioned Pole Barn. Check this book out. If you want more information, you can go to my website, farmhandscompanion.com, and go to the general store page. Scroll down. You can see some other books I've written and some other things that we have available there. But look for Building an Old-Fashioned Pole Barn. I think you'll like it. I'm Paul Mack. Until next time, I'll talk to you later. Got it. Hey, Paul Mac. I'm going to get 2 flies at once. I think I got them. God. Ah. Hey, Paul Mac. Oh, that's a dead one. Johnny, get out of here. Johnny Pate. Pine tar was used in tarring and feathering of politicians. I think there's a worldwide need for huge quantities of it. I didn't say that. I was just reading the comment. Get out!